class, graciously sponsored by Eli Levy and family Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved uncle Moshe Gindia Cohen Ben Emily. Additionally, today's class, graciously sponsored by Elias Perez and family Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved father Moshe Ben Zimbul. Additionally, today's class, graciously sponsored by Ronnie Safdi and family Le'ilui Nishmat, his father-in-law Mr. Bobby Misri Haim Reuben Ben Faride. Additionally, today's class, graciously sponsored by Ari Korkus Le'ilui Nishmat, his father Ishaq Ben Rahel Alav Shalom. And additionally, today's class, graciously sponsored by Kobi Cohen Yaakov Cohen for the Refuah Shelema of Abraham Ishaq Sahi Ben Aliza HaKohen. Hashem give him Refuah Shelema among the Halim of all of Am Israel. Amen. So, today is the second day of the Omer, but as we do every year, Baruch Hashem, in the Omer weeks, we dedicate most of the learning about the actual mitzvah called the counting of the Omer. Being today the first day that we are recording the class, obviously yesterday was Yom Tov, and we didn't do recordings for obvious halachic reasons. So, Be'ezat Hashem, we are going to start to lay down the foundation of Sefirat HaOmer, and then God willing, we will discuss the daily messages that the counting of the Omer brings upon the person. So, the word Sefirah means a few different explanations. The word Sefirah can be explained as lispor, to count, or lesaper, to tell a story. Sefirah is an emotional, so to speak, revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the physical world. We know that in the heavenly concepts of life, there are 10 Sefirot, 3 of them connected to the brain of the person, to the intellect of the person. They are called Chokhmah, Binah, Bada'ah, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Chabad Lubavitch movement is based in this protocol, Chokhmah, Binah, Bada'ah. That's why it's called Chabad. Okay? In the Pesach celebration, because even though we're talking about Omer, but Omer is a guest of Pesach, at least for this week. The matzot of the Seder, as we learned before Pesach, the 3 matzot represented the 3 aspects of the brain, Chokhmah, Binah, Da'at. That's the reason why in the Omer counting, there are 7 weeks, not 10 weeks, even though that there are 10 Sefirot, but they're actually 7 from the emotional attribute of life. The first week of the Omer, it's called Hesed. Hesed means kindness. This week belongs to Abraham Avinu. Abraham Avinu is the host of this week's Omer. Next week, the host is Ishaq. The following week, Yaakov. All the way till Shavuot, that will be David HaMelech Alav Shalom. But simultaneously, to the fact that they are the host of the Omer, they also welcome a special guest to the Omer week. The first day, Abraham Avinu was solo. Yesterday night was Ishaq Avinu. The next day, we'll have Yaakov. The following day, Moshe. The following day, Aharon. The following day, Yosef. The following day, David. And then Abraham Avinu takes a step back. And who comes? Ishaq becomes the host. So we have every week represents a different midah of the ushpizin, so to speak. First, we have Hesed connected to Abraham. We have the following week, we have Devora. Devora means strength, discipline, self-control. Then we have Yaakov Avinu. And as the weeks go by, we'll expand, at least on the first day of each of the week of the Omer, to understand what will be the message of the Omer. The Omer, in a way, it says the Rabbi Moshe Cordovero in Sefer Apartes, he says that Sefirah, it's also from the word sapphire. Sapphire is a certain type of stone. And what's the beautiful part of this? That shines brightly. It's something that is a translucent crystal, the way the book calls it, and brings a tremendous amount of light. What does it mean? That through our godly service of the Omer, we can really polish our neshama and bring forth what we have as a potential. There are two types of people. The person, or there is one person that has dual personality. The dual personality means as follows: that the person develops themselves to a certain extent, but that's not the real person. That is only a sample of the person. The real person is what Hashem gave the person the talents and the power to become the best performer of our own life. I think this is said by the great Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and other Tzaddikim as well, describe that in Shamayim there are two faces to the person. The real person that has the power and the potential to be that person, or the sample that we see on the planet Earth. And that is the reason why sometimes in our Torah we find names mentioned together. Abraham, Abraham, Yaakov, Yaakov, Noah, Noah, Moshe, Moshe. What does it mean? That when they look at Moshe, they see Moshe, Moshe is the same Moshe or no? Yes, Moshe, Moshe. Doesn't mean, let's me clarify, that if a certain tzaddik, his name is not mentioned twice simultaneously, like the cases that I described, it doesn't mean that they did not reach the level of godliness and potential. If they would have not reached it, they would have never become the founding fathers of Am Israel. They will not become the Ushpizim. They will not become who they became. I saw something yesterday that about Rabino Elimelech, that it says that he worked in one midah 25 years. 25 years he devoted to refine himself in a certain spiritual matter. Can you imagine? So I made the calculation. If he lived 100 years, he worked on 4. Scary. Obviously, when you talk about Rabbeinu Elimelech and the Baal Shem Tov and the Baba Sali and Hacham Obadiah and the many Tzaddikim, the Maram Bet Yosef, the Ramban, they were humans, but they were Tzaddikim and they were Malachim. I'd like to quote a couple of things which are, I think, essential to say them, so this way we are able to have a better understanding of the Omer. Now, it's a mahloket in the halakha if the counting of the Omer is a mitzvah from the Torah or from the Chachamim. Is a rabbinical commandment or a biblical commandment? Yesterday afternoon in the Gemara class, we learned that biblical commandments or biblical concepts, Torah concepts, become the foundation of rabbinical decrees. Meaning to say, if the Hachamim establish the concept of reciting a beracha for Sefirat HaOmer, it means that it wasn't something that the Hachamim just woke up one day and they'd say, you know what, let's add one more beracha. No, that is founded or established based on the pasuk that we quoted inside earlier that says, Usfartem lachem mimachorat Shabbat. Usfartem lachem. You must count for yourself. But Hachamim, taking that sentence from the Torah, formalize the counting of the Omer. And that's the reason why we don't say Sheheyanu when it comes to the counting of the Omer. Why we don't say Sheheyanu? We say Sheheyanu on Hanukkah, Purim, Rosh Hashana. Every time you do something special, we do Shehiyanu. Checking for the Hametz, we don't say Shehiyanu. Although technically we should say Shehiyanu. But why we don't say Shehiyanu? Because we're going to be getting rid of the Hametz the next morning. So to say Shehiyanu on something that's going to be disposed of is not the proper way. But some halachic authorities say that when we say Shehiyanu in the night of the Seder, part of the concept of Shehiyanu is to cover the beracha of Bedikat Hametz. But why we don't say Shehiyanu? Short answer, that there is also a different debate in halakha. How many mitzvot is the actual mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer? One opinion says every night is a separate mitzvah. Other opinion says no. It's one mitzvah that has 49 fractions. So since we don't know if the person is going to make it by counting the Omer every night, we don't do Shehiyanu. But parallel to that, our Hachamim, to allow the person to continue with the counting of the Omer, they gave us a plan B in the counting of the Omer. At night, we count the Omer with Beracha, and in the daytime, we count the Omer without Beracha, especially at the synagogue. That's what we did it before. Right, as soon as the Kabbal finished, before the Sefer comes out, we do Hayom, Shenei, Yamim, Omer. Why? So in the event that there is somebody in the Kahal that for some reason did not say Sefirat HaOmer the night before, when tonight comes, then you are able to say the Beracha of the Omer accordingly. Another concept in Sefirat HaOmer is the special added statement that we say at the end of the Omer. We say, Rahaman, uyahazilanu abodat bet HaMikdash. Interesting enough that when we do other mitzvot of the Torah or Hachamim that we do throughout the year, we don't say, Hashem built the Bet HaMikdash speedily in our days, amen. Why not? Short answer, because the Omer is a mitzvah that it requires physical action to truly fulfill it. Remember the first night of the Omer, second night of Pesach, we introduced the offering of the Omer. Now when the Yom Tov first day finished in the Bet HaMikdash, they used to bring the barley and they used to offer it and they used to do a whole ceremonial procedure, which that, by the way, became the how do I say this? The transition between Kemach Yashan and Kemach Hadash. I'm sure you heard of this concept, the new flour, the old flour. So what is the meaning of the Kemach Yashan and Kemach Hadash? Short answer, that before a person was allowed to benefit from the flour that the field provide and produce, it needed to be preceded by the offering of the Omer. So if you had harvesting, you had wheat that was harvested, for example, in the month of September, right? That flour was Hadash, was the new flour, because the flour did not live, or the grains did not live through the first day of Hol HaMoed Pesach. Once the Omer was offered, then automatically all the grains that you had from the last harvesting period, now they became permissible. And anything else that came from the next crop, it will have to go through Omer offering, and then it becomes permissible. That's how the whole thing of Yashan flours applies. In Eretz Israel, Yashan flour is non-negotiable. It's mandatory. It's one of the mitzvot of the Torah that still apply in Eretz Israel. Outside of Israel, depends who you ask. We try that in our synagogue, all the products are Yashan. Why? Because according to many Sephardic authorities, Yashan for the Sephardic community is mandatory. It's required. The Ashkenazi communities relies on the Bah that says you're buying it from a Gentile, it's not from Eretz Israel, So then you're allowed to lean on that opinion, especially when certain situations do develop, traveling, etc. But this awareness of Yashan is so powerful in the Jewish world that most of the stores here in South Florida, like in Brooklyn, like in Deal, they say, Kemach Yashan, Yashan flour. You open up a package of cookies. Hames, not now, but next week, you'll see Kemach Yashan or Yoshon. Why they put it? Because according to many opinions, this is required. This is one of the things that happened post the offering of the Omer. The Omer was actually an offering made out of barley. It was not wheat. Now, why this offering was made out of barley? There are 5 grains in the Torah. Why barley? Short answer. And what I'm going to say now may be a bit strong from some of the audience, but it doesn't matter. Nothing to be afraid of. The Shem Shamayim. The Shem Shamayim. So there was a time in history that humans will not eat barley. Barley was given to the animals. Today is different, right? You make hamin, you make dafina, cholent, whatever you do, whatever your tradition is, you add barley. So through history, things did change. But back then, the barley was considered a substandard type of food, and therefore it was given to the animals, not to humans. Hita ma'achal adam, se'ora ma'achal behema. That's what's written. So the question is, hold on a minute. If the barley is foods for animal, why do I need to bring an offering of barley in the Bet HaMikdash? Bring wheat. Many offerings were made out of wheat. Hames, Masa, why barley in the Omer? And that's what's going to get heavy. The Torah is telling us the following. We left Egypt. We left Egypt when? Shabbat. The real day that we left Egypt was Thursday. Thursday we left Egypt, back in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. For us, for the calendar 2022, 5782, we left Egypt Shabbat morning, the first day of Pesach. So what happens? After we left Egypt, we received the Torah 50 days later, correct? So what does that mean? That leaving Egypt was only a necessary step for us to receive the Torah. So what does that mean? That leaving Egypt wasn't the main goal and purpose. The main goal and purpose is for us to be ready to receive the Torah. And leaving Egypt is a requirement. It's like you want to travel to Israel, correct? Without a passport. Impossible. Unless, God forbid, something else happens, but most normal people know that you want to travel overseas, you must have a passport. Not that the passport will determine anything where you're going to be traveling to, but the passport is the document that you need in order to show yourself at the airport. Otherwise, you can have the most expensive seat in the airplane, and yet they will tell you, sir, no passport, you can't go even through TSA. Okay? So Pesach, how important Pesach is, but Pesach was the setup that we needed in order to reach the ultimate goal, which was receiving the Torah. But you can't just leave Egypt after 210 years, and be ready to receive the Torah. We need to cleanse ourselves. We needed to purify ourselves. And that's why the 49 days of the Omer are days of self-refinement. So therefore, if the person makes the effort to refine themselves, we are in the right track. But what happens if the person does not invest any effort in refining themselves, in improving themselves? You know what is the hint? So we're not better than animals. God forbid. Animals and humans share a lot of similarities. There are three basic differences between a human and an animal. Number one, koah hadibur, the power of speech. Number two, the brain, the intellect. And number three, behira hofshit, the freedom of choice. Even in the human body, the Balatanya calls it nefesh elokit, nefesh behemit. A person has two souls. One is called animalistic soul. Why you call it animalistic soul? Call it human soul. Says no. Because if you don't activate your spiritual aspect of life, you're not different than an animal. You eat, the animal eats. You sleep, the animal sleeps. You procreate, the animal procreates. You believe yourself, the animal does the same. You need to eat to survive, the same thing with the animal. So then, what really makes a difference between a human and an animal? We said, the brain. So therefore, the Omer is telling us, if you're not going to seize these 50 days to make a change, so how are you going to get ready for Matan Torah, for Shavuot? What do you think? Shavuot is about the samosa and the lasagna and the cheesecake? I know that Pesach is off limits, but I'm sure that there is samosa kasher in Pesach. Yes, I know. And so, anyways, so with that being said, we are asking a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Borei Olam, bring the Geulah, build the Bet HaMikdash, for us to be able to actually perform the Omer. I will have to say a couple of more things. And we quoted yesterday the Ramban, Nachmanides. So it says, Kulam Kedoshim, all the days of Pesach and the days of the Omer are considered holy days. Not holy days in the sense of the limitations of the things that we can or we cannot do. But there is like an extra dosage of holiness that permeates the day. So it says, Be'ayamim ha'sepurim bintayim keholo shel mo'ed ben harishon be'ashemini bahag. It says the Ramban, a powerful hidush, and it says, don't think for a moment that Hol HaMoed is applicable only from today till Thursday night, that these are the halachic days of Hol HaMoed. But it says the Ramban that every day of Omer carries the Kedusha of Hol HaMoed. Unbelievable. Obviously, we put on tefillin, we don't say Hallel unless it's Rosh Chodesh, but the idea is, don't think that the days of the Omer are just days in the calendar. Don't just count the day. Make sure that every day counts. In other words, we need to ask ourselves, what did I do today? This is in Torah language, it's called Heshbon HaNefesh. Some people do it once a year. Some people do it the month of Elul. And some people do it every night before they go to sleep. That's what's written in the holy books. Before you go to sleep, you play a movie of your day. Shouldn't take you too long. I do it often. It takes seconds. Okay? Whatever good I did today, Hazak Baruch. Whatever not so good I did today, tomorrow will be a better day. And then the person starts recognizing the changes that are required. And nobody hears of this. Nobody needs to know. This is between you and your pillow. When they call pillow talk, that means Heshbon and Nefesh. Don't call a therapist. Now, I'd like to say one more. What I'm going to say now is going to be a bit heavier than before. If before was heavy, now it's going to get heavier. but in a good way. In a good way. Nothing to be afraid of. My purpose is to set up the foundation for the next 48 days. To understand what are we getting into when we say the Omer, etc. David, knock on the door, on the kitchen, please. Tell them to bring more breakfast for the next minyan. Don't worry about it. Thank you. You can turn in Spanish if necessary. Okay, let's continue. Comes the Sefat Emet. Are you sitting? Beautiful. Comes the Sefat Emet and it says, Misheshomer Sefirat HaOmer, who observes the Omer days karaui, properly, and Hag HaShavuot, those that need to go through judgment in the days of Rosh Hashana. You wanted something heavy? Let me explain. Where the Sefat Emet gets such a concept. Short answer, the Zohar HaKadosh. I have it in front of me. The Zohar HaKadosh says, Perashat Tetzaveh. The day of Rosh Hashana, as we know, is Yom Adin, Judgment Day. We have 3 books open. The book of the righteous, the book of the wicked, and the book of the middle of the road. We all know this. But the question is, it says, who really gets judged in Rosh Hashana? We know that everybody gets judged in Rosh Hashana. But who they pay attention to, which is not a good thing that they do. Because if they pay attention to judge, it means that they're going to scrutinize our deeds and our actions. So better, go on the ground, right? So it says, En danim bet Rosh Hashana, ela leotam shelo lakhu hama'achal shel harefuah shehu hamatzah bepesach. It says very simple. Whoever did not took advantage of Pesach, of eating the matzah, that we call it the food of healing and the food of emunah, meaning to say, if a person believes Pesach is heke, I have my matzah, I have my haroset, I have my maror, a wafi, eat, and that's the end of it. So for you, Pesach was an expensive bill to the supermarket without achieving much. But if a person eats the matzah in Pesach and celebrates the Seder in the proper way, and does whatever we are able to do, that brings this emunah into the person. And it says, why? Because most likely someone who did not really celebrate Pesach properly, most likely ate Hametz in Pesach. Now, what does it mean that ate Hametz in Pesach? I guarantee you that if we do a spot visit, a surprise visit to anyone's home, we're going to see that all the food is kasher Pesach, and all the Hametz is put away, sealed with a tape, etc. So what does it mean? The Zohar HaKadosh says, if you did Pesach heke, you ate Hametz. It says the Zohar HaKadosh that the eating of the Hametz here doesn't mean, God forbid, that a person ate Hametz. But it means that the person is still listening to the Yetzer Hara. And if the person is still listening to the Yetzer Hara, it's like you're eating Hametz. Why? The Zohar calls Hametz Yetzer Hara. And the Zohar calls Matzah Yetzer Tov. Ga'ava, Anava. Thin Matzah, humility. Heavy bread, thick bread, haughtiness, arrogance. Continues the Zohar HaKadosh, and it says that the person on the day of Rosh Hashana, Ahu Hametz, that Hametz, that means that listening to the Yetzer Hara, Silka umekatreg aleh, accuses the person, Be'alshin aleh, and now present themselves in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm here to testify. Who are you? I'm the Yetzer Hara that Mr. So-and-so listened to me, during the week of Pesach and during the Omer. There was nothing changed in the person's life. Yeah, he bought a suit for the holiday and he bought 2 aliyot at the synagogue. That's very nice. Don't start doing that. But that's not all. And he goes further and it says, 3 for the raffle, you can do the 6 ticket special for 1,800. Umeshen is har bepesach me'achilat hametz. It's like we mentioned the halacha that Hacham Rabbi Yosef alav shalom quotes in the opening statement of Pesach. What the halacha says, Kol zahir mechames b'mashehu muftach lo shelo yecheta kol hashana kula. Rabbeinu Hari says, whoever is meticulous with no hames during the Pesach, guarantee that this person will not sin throughout the entire year. I ask you a question. I'm sure, and I can only speak about myself, that I don't eat hames during Pesach. And probably at home, you will not see things that people just buy heke because it has a sticker kasher Pesach, but it has a supervision. Pesach is the time that the person should do the best that they can to the best of their abilities. For each person, their own level. But yet, I will be the first one to tell you, I do averot. So how come that the halacha says, if you are careful with the hames, guarantee you will not sin? The Zohar says, you know what that means? It means that we are careful of not listening to the Yetzer Hara. בסדר, תגיע לדרגה, תדבר על זה אחר כך. Okay? He's a comedian. Okay. He says, my sins are his mitzvot. Relax. I'm not going to fit in the chair. I'm going to become hames now. No, because hames is all about ga'ava, holiness. So the Zohar Kadosh explains, you know what that means? It doesn't mean about not eating hames. I'm sure that nobody here eats hames, Baruch Hashem. But the hames is referring to our bonding with the Yetzer Hara. Are we a fan of the Yetzer Hara? Are we a follower of the Yetzer Hara? A lot of people have followers, right? Through social media especially. But does that make them good mashpi'in? Obviously not. So it says, the Zohar further, Ube korbana de Omer itbatel Yetzer Hara. It says, and the translation adds, Be'al yedeh sefirat ha'omer. If a person internalizes, this is all the introduction. We haven't spoken yet. What does it mean to change during the Omer? Probably we'll do it tomorrow without the introduction. But I wanted to set up the stage today so when we start discussing the messages of each day, we already understand why we need to do this. So it says, through the offering of the Omer in the Bet HaMikdash, or now through the counting of the Omer, the person is given the power to overcome the Yetzer Hara. Based on this, if I have the Yetzer Hara under control, when the Rosh Hashana comes, it's not a day of fear. It's Rosh Hashana. Because a lot of things get changed. Like we mentioned the first day of Pesach. The year has 2 halves. Rosh Hashana till Pesach. Pesach, Rosh Hashana. That's how it works. So now, my first half is gone. Now I'm studying my second half of the year. But I'm studying good. I'm studying strong. Not only with all of the mitzvot of Pesach, but actually by the daily messages of Sefirat HaOmer. So the question is, now that we understand that the Omer, it's basically a time of self-improvement, where do I start? In which aspect of life do I need to work on during the days of Sefirat HaOmer? We will be surprised at the answer to this question. In Judaism, there are three aspects that play a huge role in the life of the person. One is Torah learning, obviously. The other one is doing mitzvot, because if you learn Torah but we don't do mitzvot, that's not good enough. If we do mitzvot but we don't learn Torah, that's not good enough neither. Even though the purpose of Torah is to do mitzvot, but when a person learns Torah, the mitzvot are of a different level. They are not just robotic perform mitzvot, but they are mitzvot that a person understands what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say, berachot, a bit of kavanah, etc. That's something that is required for everyone. But there is a third area of life that perhaps it's equally important to the other two. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol nihya b'dvaro. And the third aspect of life perhaps is more challenging than the other two aspects of life. Let's take Torah learning. Baruch Hashem, here, and I'm sure that wherever you are through the year, you learn Torah. You go to the synagogue to pray, you have a nice breakfast, you learn a few minutes of Torah in the morning, in the evening. So the batteries of Torah learning are there. Also depends who you surround yourself with, which synagogue you go, who is your rabbi, who is your social circle. That also has a tremendous amount of influence on the action and the behavior of the person as a Jew. But there is one area that this is the person, a personal DNA when it comes to midot, when it comes to character traits. So our rabbis tell us that the 49 days of the Omer are days of self-refinement. How to become a better Yehudi, but how to become a better person. We have to remember this. There are many billions of citizens out there in the world, and there are many good people out there in the world. But the question is, what is it considered a good person according to the Torah? So let's be honest. The standards of the Torah are much higher than the standards of the world. Can you imagine if the Goim will have a prohibition of Lashon Hara? There will be no newspapers, no radio stations, no TV programs, no internet, nothing. No TikTok, no YouTube, nothing. Why? Because all these ideas in certain areas, despite the good that they have, they also have a very negative side to it. So what the Torah tells us, be careful, don't talk about people. Another concept, protocols of kosher money, for example, honesty in business, not charging interest, paying salaries on time, etc. So we answer to a higher standard of living. The Omer teaches us that despite the fact that we have Torah learning and performance of the mitzvot, there is an area in life that requires improvement. And this is, how do I behave as a person, as a human being? How do I behave? I'm kind, I'm benevolent, I'm generous, I'm calm, I'm happy, or God forbid, the opposite. I have a short fuse. I don't filter when I speak. Like we learned yesterday in the Omer protocol, that the sifter of the Omer barley offering had 13 layers of mesh. What does it mean, 13 layers? I'm sure you saw your wife and your mother sifting flowers. Today they come already sifted, many of them. But when you sift flour, you don't use a big hole sifter because a lot of things can go through that hole. So what do? The tiny, 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 tiny mesh that nothing gets by with the exception of the grain of flour or the speck of flour. That's how the Omer was filtered. You know what the rabbis teach us? When you speak, put a filter in your mouth. Remember what we learned in the Pesach? The Rashi Tevot Karpas, what was it? Kelal Rishon Pe Sagur. Rashi Tevot Karpas. Rule number 1, keep your mouth shut. Yahas Magid. And when you have to talk, say half of what we wanted to say. Not easy. That is a simple example of what does it mean self-refinement. Because if we put no brakes in our mouth, not only that we may be doing averot while we talk, especially with the language and vocabulary that a person will use, but then you're more averot. You're hurting someone. You cause pain. That's a simple example. But what if a person gets upset very rapidly and a person explodes and acts in ways which are not proper? Or what if the person, God forbid, acts or talks in a very condescending manner? My way or the highway. In Torah aspects, if you say my way or the highway, you're going to go to the highway. You don't get your way. You may get it superficially, but in Shamayim, no. And this is only a simple, free sample of what is expected from us, the way Rabbi Noam Elimelech writes, Ki ha'adam lo nivra ba'olam רק לשפר את הטבע, לכן יזרז את עצמו לתקן מידותיו. Says Rabbeinu Elimelech, we were put out in the world with a lot of missions. One of the missions is break your nature. Break your natural way. What does it mean? If you're a happy person, keep being happy. Don't change. But if you're a Tisha B'Av mode person, you must change that. Tisha B'Av is once a year. One day, Hajj. That's it. Okay? If you get angry easily, the person needs to learn how to develop self-control. Reinforcing emunah mitigates anger. Because anger happens due to the lack of emunah. That's simple. And that's why the Gemara writes, Lo tirtah ve'lo teheta. Shlomo HaMelech says, I will explain, Ish hema rav pasha. The Gemara says, don't get angry and you will not sin. And if you see a person, Ish hema, a person that is hot-tempered, gets upset for anything and everything, Rav Pasha is a person that commits a lot of sins daily. And the Averot are fueling his fire of anger, and because he doesn't have enough mitzvot, there is no antidote to the anger that he or she is displaying. And that's why the Ramban, the Nachmanides, in the famous letter that he wrote to his son, what does he say? Itnaheg tamid ledaber kol devarecha benachat. Rule number 1 of life, speak in a calm, pleasant, good way to every person in every situation. And this will help you to avoid anger. Because if you are calm, and if you are a person who develops this calming type of personality, anger gradually will subside. And how the Ramban catalogs anger שהיא מידה רעה מכל המידות הרעות. Is the worst enemy of the person. וכאשר תנסל מן הכעס, once I'm able to overcome my anger, יעלה על לבך מידת הענווה, שהיא מידה טובה מכל המידות הטובות. Will flourish in your heart humility, which is the best thing to have in life. You know why? Because if we are humble, nothing should bother us. Why things bother us? Because we have arrogance. And we think that if you don't do the way I say to do, you're wrong and I'm right. And those type of personalities probably concentrates also on negativity. You ask someone, how was the wedding last week? The music was too loud. What kind of answer is that? I was expecting the wedding was very nice. The caterer was a disaster. You just killed a guy and the parnasa. Are you going to be responsible for that? You're going to feed his family? But those kinds of comments, besides are dangerous and very negative, demonstrate to a certain extent the personality that that person has. I am a type of person that I cannot stand negativity. If you have negativity, you will not last working with me. Is that true? Thank you. Like a Hazan. A Hazan needs to be happy. Why? Because his happiness influences the prayers. And when the prayers are said in a happy mindset, they break down all barriers. And that's why happiness plays such an important role in Judaism. How many times the Torah talks about happiness? Holidays, ושמחת בחגיך. Marriage, ושימח את אשתו. Hashem's blessings, ושמחת בכל הטוב. והיית אח שמח. Another פרשה כי תבוא, תחת אשר לא עבדת, את השם אלוקיך בשמחה וטוב לבב מרוב כל. The Pasuk says, one of the reasons why we experience hiccups and challenges and difficulties in life is because we fail to serve God with happiness. It's not a midrash, it's a pasuk in the parasha. Sometimes when you say midrashim, people, some accept it, some not. We accept everything that's written in the holy source. But I'm going straight to the source. The Torah says, you want to know the reason why we go through these hardships? Due to the fact that we fail to serve God with joy and a gladdened heart when we had the opportunity. So what does it mean? That happiness plays a tremendous role in the life of the person. I'll finish with the following statement, because I don't want to go into overtime, which I believe I did, but it's Chola Moed. Who is working in Chola Moed? You're in sunny Florida, mini Gan Eden, right? So let me conclude the following. Says Rabbeinu Haim Vital that one of the main purposes of marriage is to work in the topic of Sefirat HaOmer. That when a person is married, the person develops many good midot, hopefully, that they were hidden while the person was single. Because suddenly you have a wife, suddenly you have children, and you understand that the wife and the children, the way the Gemara writes, Shehi behem teluim bo, the wife and children rely on the husband, and the husband relies on the creator of the world. That's what the Gemara writes. So once the person gets married, maybe in the beginning is very challenging. That's why the Pasuk writes in the marriage aspect in the Torah, Besimach et ishto, asher lakach, a requirement that a person brings happiness to the wife. Rabbeinu Haim Vital says that through marriage, the person learns how to live with a wife, and that brings the person to gradually self-improve their behavior, because you know that when you are by yourself, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to answer to anyone. You do what you want without limitations, without restrictions. Now that you have a family, Baruch Hashem, that changes the person. And that change brings the person the potential that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave each and every one of us. This is in a nutshell what we are going to have the menu for the next 48 days. We're already on the second day. Tomorrow, for the audience, we'll review the exercises, because every day of the Omer has an exercise. Exercise between me and Hashem, exercise between me and my fellow men, and the third exercise for myself. What I'm doing for myself today. What do you do for yourself? We'll discuss this by Ezrat Hashem in the next few days. Tizkor Yeshanim Rabot. Chazal Baruch to all of the sponsors. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia Omer. רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל. לפיכך הרבה להם תורה מצוות שנאמר. אדוני חפש למען צדקו יגיד תורה וידיד. קדיש.